John McMullen over at 97.3 ESPN.com. He has the winners and losers from the Eagles offseason. You know, the NFL is basically 12 months. You get like 5 weeks off. But the offseason has been filled with interesting stories from the day after the season on, with Chip Kelly basically before the season started. Chip Kelly getting fired, Doug Peterson getting hired, and everything in between. Let's get John's take on who had a good offseason, who had a bad offseason, the winners and losers over at 97.3 ESPN.com. You can read it right now. John, it has been this is like the exclamation point at the end of, it seems that every year their off seasons are just bizarre. I mean, crazy stuff happens to this team all the time. Last year you had basically Kelly demanding that he wants to be the GM. They push Roseman to the side. They fire Kelly this year. They basically give everything back to Roseman. I don't know which off season has been more bizarre, this one or last.
Yeah, it's some of it's self-inflicted, obviously, Mike. When you all you have to do is look in the same state out west and go about 6 hours up the turnpike and look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the way for long-term success in this league is continuity at the top. And the Eagles haven't had that. They had it for a while, obviously, with Andy Reid, but the Chip Kelly regime changed that. And then you talk about how it ended, and basically within a calendar year, the Eagles took power away from Howie Roseman and gave it back to him. And I can't think of another instance in the history of this league where that's happened. So that's dysfunctional. That part of it is self-inflicted. Now you have to show the courage of your convictions if you're Jeffrey Lurie and stay the course. If this is the way you want to go, there's going to be hiccups. There's always hiccups. You have to be stand tall, and you have to be strong, and you have to fight through it, and not care about criticism and things of that nature. And we'll see how that works out. But certainly, by the way Howie has done things contractually, he believes in continuity on the football team. Now we have to see it in the front office and make sure this thing's going in the right direction.
So in hindsight here, do you look at last year that the Eagles caved into Kelly's demands because they gave the job right back to Roseman? It was almost as if they didn't want to remove Roseman in the first place, but they were afraid to move Kelly, pushed him down the hallway and said, hey, look, if this fails, don't go too far.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. With hindsight, Jeffrey Lurie kept Howie around as sort of a safety net. And that's not how you run a business. That's not how you run a football team. If he believes in Howie Roseman, and clearly he does, and that's the person he trusts more than anyone else, as far as the football side of this organization goes, which is fine, but he should have held his ground with Chip Kelly. And if that meant Chip Kelly walking out the door, that meant Chip Kelly walking out the door. That was his mistake, to not stand firm and say, look, I like the way Howie runs this organization from a personnel standpoint, and that's the way we're going to go. If you can work in that structure, then you can be the head coach of this football team. If not, you're going to have to move on. So I think that's where he made his biggest mistake, and that obviously came to fruition. And I don't even know if Chip Kelly, after doing it, would want that job again, because he just doesn't have experience doing it, and it's just too difficult to put that much on any one person's plate, and that's kind of what happened to the Philadelphia Eagles last year.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. He ranks his winners and losers. Who are some of the guys that you list, John, that stand out in terms of this OTA period for Philadelphia?
Well, I think the one guy that stood out above all else was Leos McKelvin, and the head coach kind of admitted that. When you look about where he was, obviously signed from Buffalo to a 2-year deal, he was expected to be a starter. There's no question about that. But as you go through the off-season program, it's not now clear that he's their best corner and by a wide margin, and then everybody is fighting for that second spot. So I think he, number one, I think the surprise of Alan Barber being sort of christened the starter at left guard, even though I still want to see what happens come July. I think that was one of the biggest surprises when Doug Peterson sort of intimated and called him his guy, and he was going to be the starter at left guard. So you have to consider him a winner. And then Jalen Mills, I think, was my third. And as a rookie seventh-round pick, you think about where he started on the third team, and by the second week, he was seeing repetitions with the first team. So even though Jim Schwartz will claim that there's no depth charts this time of year, it was evident that he opened a lot of eyes, and the Eagles think they might have something. And anytime you get a contributor in the seventh round, that's obviously a pretty successful draft choice.
Yeah, he's a guy I wrote about the other day as well at 97.3 ESPN.com. John is with us. Sue did not have the best offseason.
Well, I think it starts with Eric Rowe for the same reasons as sort of Leotis McKelvin at the same position. When we went into this process, he was a no doubt about it starter. He was the one. Even McKelvin, you could say, well, if Nolan Carroll gets healthy, maybe he'll be the nickelback or something of that nature. Rowe is going to be a starter. And now that we're done the offseason, he's clearly fallen behind not only McKelvin, but also Ron Brooks. Nolan Carroll was ahead of him when he was finally cleared for team drills. And Mills is sort of at his heels, and you could argue he's ahead of him. So for a guy who was supposed to be the number one corner going into the off-season process, all of a sudden when he goes to training camp, he's going to be number 4 or 5, and that by definition is a bad off-season.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that happened this offseason in terms of free agent signings, the Bradford stuff, the fact that they fired their coach, they hired a new coach, that all adds up to a very intriguing season coming up where training camp is about a month from now, and we will have it covered from wall to wall with John over at 97.3 ESPN.com. And moving, into a couple other NFL topics here, John, of course, covers the league nationally for todayspigskin.com. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen to get more NFL news, because there are camps that are still going on, John. And this Fletcher Cox thing has kind of set a ripple effect through the NFL. I mean, you look at Short, you look at Wilkerson, you look at Miller. There's a lot of guys now that are licking their chops, but there's a lot of teams that aren't happy with the Eagles now.
No, they aren't. And one of the things Denver specifically was trying to argue with Von Miller and his agent, that the Ndamukong Suh contract was an anomaly when the Dolphins signed him and gave him the $60 million guaranteed. And now it's kind of tougher to make that argument, because this is going to be the going rate, and this is the new measuring stick. So, yeah, I think players like Miller and K'Wan Short, as you mentioned, Mo Wilkerson with the Jets, they're very, very excited about that contract, because all of a sudden it gives them more ammunition to negotiate with their team, specifically Denver, because I don't see any way Denver can mess around with Von Miller, considering what he means to that organization and that defense. They have to get something done by July 15th. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be tough to argue that the Sue thing is now an anomaly. And Miller, as good as Fletcher Cox is, obviously different positions, but I don't think there's a more impactful defensive player in football right now than Von Miller. So he sees that contract and he's going to want more.
Hey, Phil Sheridan told us earlier on the show, John, that Darius, Sue, and Cox should get that Jim Schwartz should get a cut from those guys. I mean, he got them guys paid. I mean, and I think the Eagles are really factoring in their production in Schwartz's defense when they look down the road at Fletcher Cox and what he'll be over the next 6 years. See, the difference between Darius and Sue more so, those guys got those contracts Sue got it leaving Schwartz's defense and going to a different defense. Cox is getting that contract entering Schwartz's defense. Darius got the deal, and then Schwartz left. So this is the one guy who's going to get that deal with Schwartz here. The question will be, if Cox plays at such a high level and this defense is good, how long will Schwartz be here?
Not long. He's a very well-regarded guy. You see it. You're right. I mean, part of it is, I mean, a guy like Sue, he's going to get paid no matter what. He's so talented, and he has some other issues that some of the on-field stuff he's done in the past. But that guy's a Hall of Fame talent, and I don't, it doesn't matter if it were Jim Schwartz or John McMullen or Mike Gill, he would have been a top-tier player. But clearly, his reputation is well known around this league, and he does elevate, especially he has elevated the play of interior defensive linemen. There's no question about it. So those guys do deserve at least the tip of the cap to him, certainly. And the fact that he was out of football for a year and sort of doing the consult position with the NFL officiating department, I think that takes some of the bad taste out of what happened in Detroit. It goes a little bit farther away. Time heals all wounds. So if all of a sudden this Eagles defense, which was abysmal under Bill Davis and Chip Kelly, if this turns into a top 5 defensive unit, well, Jim Schwartz is going to get head coaching job interviews this offseason, coming after this year. That's how quick it's going to happen. And he could leave that quickly.
All right, the NFL never stops. We got more training OTAs this week. The Eagles a couple of weeks off, and of course we'll have all the NFL news covered with John. You can follow him for NFL news at JF McMullen, and check out all his national coverage over at todayspigskin.com. He's got a good article about Howie Roseman up there as well. It's nonstop, John, nonstop.
You're telling me.
Take care, man.
All right, thanks, bud.